All right, welcome back to another episode. I'm really excited about this because I have my partner, Dr. Jill Wener, in Conscious Anti-Racism here, and we often do our podcasts together. We have our separate podcasts. I have the podcast Behind Beliefs and Behaviors, and then Dr. Jill has a Conscious Anti-Racism podcast, and we like to come together to cultivate these conversations because we are, in fact, partners in this social justice work. And so I'm really excited to have you back. Jill, if you would, just for any new listeners who might be listening on my side, would you fully introduce yourself?
Yes, I am Dr. Jill Wener. A hospital medicine internist for 10 years, and I've been out of the clinical space since 2015. I'm a EFT tapping practitioner and trainer, your partner, so co-founder and partner in Conscious Anti-Racism, and do a lot of work in physician wellness as well.
Yes, we twin a lot in this space, being that we both have come out and are in the sort of well-being and mindfulness in different aspects, but sort of like this mindfulness and physician well-being space. So that's, I think, one of the things that sort of attracted us to each other in the first place. Before we even became partners, we were like, oh, what we're doing is similar, and we're both in Atlanta. And so it has just been, over the years, wonderful to do this work with you and to model this work with you as well. It just as recently as the day of this recording.
True story.
True story. True story. Very mindful, very demure.
Very demure.
So, we're talking about these, we're, as we often do, we're talking about recognizing the characteristics of white supremacism in order to interrupt it. And, the way we do this work is very different because we bring these characteristics often as symptoms, modeling after Tema Okung's work. And I think that the way we tend to model the teaching of this work makes it very accessible. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think generally when people hear the words white supremacy or white supremacism, as we prefer to call it, it brings up an emotional response in people probably of all identities. And I think people have asked us before, like, what's the how do people react to your work? And I feel like surprisingly or not surprisingly, people are able to hear it because we attempt to. I hope we succeed at presenting it in a way that people understand what it means. And then we also teach people tools how to like deal with all those feelings as they come up. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely an integral part of what we teach people. And I think also how you and I like model it ourselves and how we see it coming up for us in our own dynamic.
Yeah. And I want to, I love that. I think like 100%, 1,000% what you said. And I want to like sort of distinguish because you did mention, white supremacism and white supremacy and how we call it white supremacism. And one of the reasons that we do that being because of it is an ism, right? It's an ism like racism, like sexism, like all the other isms, and really a lot of the isms are bred out of white supremacism. So, we distinguish it as an ism because it is something that can be shifted and changed, like most isms, as opposed to an E, which is a diagnosis that could be more permanent or like a part of a person's permanent personality. And so I just wanted to, because, you sort of mentioned it, I wanted to sort of bring that up. Like, that's why people say, well, why do you, like we talk about trauma a lot together and why do we say activated versus triggered? And we talk about that in the spaces as well. So I think it's useful. I agree with you. I think that we have been told many times in the work that we've done that because of the way we present the characteristics or even as symptoms, being that we are of medical background, it allows people to a to step a little bit back from the emotion of it and view it more from an observer perspective. And
Mhm.
when you can view something, I think personally, and this is in the work, part of the course, we talk about the three positions of listening. And one of them is the observer position. So when you can observe something and see it for what it is, then you can look at, well, how does it show up in me? How does this
Yeah.
thing, this object, this thing that I'm examining, what are the areas that I can see and relate to, that I see myself doing it, or that I see it out in the world? And I think that's one of the ways that um, makes it more palatable or more digestible for people.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think people hear white supremacy and they think KKK. They think Confederate flags, they think tiki torches and white nationalism. And like, I feel like when we first started doing this work together, it felt like those things were more fringy than they are now. But I think you and I always talk about that those things are the fringe,
Mhm,
but the fabric is the white supremacy or the white supremacism.
mhm.
So those things are part of it. It's like they're under the umbrella of it. But white supremacism shows up in all kinds of way that don't even look like race
Mhm,
or any kind of identity dynamics.
mhm,
Um, so I think for people to understand that, like, it's all of those things, those scary things that we want to
mhm.
point our fingers at and say are not us. And then it's also these ways that our culture is permeated and sort of created and perpetuated to keep white people in power.
Right, right.
And yeah,
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. And I have to agree that these things that we used to call fringy are not so fringy anymore. I mean,
yeah,
I think that unfortunately what we're seeing is they are popping up more frequently in the fabric. And it is, I think that there's a lot of fear w- from the people who feel that they're losing power,
yeah,
and they're gripping on for dear life. And I think that's why we're starting to see this, the perpetuation and fear being one of the biggest characteristics,
yeah,
right? One of the how um, I would say how it all began is it's inciting fear, like it's violence and fear and being perpetuated. And then there are all the other things that sort of like evolve out of that fear, like the paternalism, like the only one right way, like the, either or, the binary, like all of those things kind of evolve out of this fear. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. And yeah, yeah, like the defensiveness coming out of that. And you think it might be fun to talk about our dynamic this morning? In
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, and what I'll just yes, and what I'll say, just to kind of put a little point, a period on that, is not a period, but like a semicolon. Me and my me and my punctuations today. But it's
worship of the written word.
worship of the written word, girl. In effort to control. So fear, all of these things that sort of like evolve out of fear in the effort to control an outcome that really doesn't need to be controlled, like from a place of scarcity.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
And a wanting to keep the status quo exactly where it is.
Exactly.
So fear mongering to keep people from banding together.
Mhm.
So if we keep everyone scared of all the other people that are coming to get their jobs and their everything,
Mhm.
then they won't realize that they have much more in common with each other than they do with the power structure.
Yeah.
And fear to speak up, fear to challenge authority.
Mhm.
So yeah, I mean, it's used in so many ways. It's frightening.
I mean, divide and conquer didn't come from nowhere.
Exactly. Yes. True.
Mhm.
True. So I think, one of the ways that we try to normalize this is that it's everywhere. This
Mhm.
what this culture of it, these characteristics, we've named a few of them: paternalism, only one right way, the binary either or. We're naming these things, and if you don't know what we're talking about, that's okay. But what we're talking about is these sort of characteristics of our culture that show up in different ways,
Mhm.
and they're sneaky. I think because we can all recognize racism, hopefully,
Mhm.
when it's a racial slur, or
Mhm.
if it's a not microaggression where aggression where
Yeah.
people are getting better at recognizing those things. But
Mhm.
when these characteristics show up, they're in all facets of our life.
Mhm.
Anybody can be perpetuating them. It's just not
Correct.
like only white people perpetuate them,
Mhm.
and they can get, we can talk about the kind of internalized aspect too.
Yeah.
But this isn't like a you were paternalistic to someone one time, therefore you're a racist. Like, it's not
Right.
that correlation.
Mhm.
It's that recognizing that the concept of paternalism upholds current power structures and it
Mhm.
upholds systems of oppression. I know better than you, therefore I make decisions for you and don't listen to your voice. So even things like that we can think about. And then in our own dynamic, we name it all the time.
Mhm.
Um, and it's like, uh, for me, it like releases when I see that it's part of a bigger thing, and
Mhm.
I'm aware that I am perpetuating it.
Mhm.
I don't know. I feel like I take it like less of a personal shame on myself,
Mhm.
more of a like, oh, okay, this is the thing that I'm doing. How can I be accountable
Yeah.
and acknowledge it and shift it?
Yeah. Yeah. I love what you said about just because you exhibit a characteristic, does it necessarily mean that you're a racist? While you can be responsible for the the behavior that's bred out of a characteristic of white supremacism. So, like as an example of what you said, just like another way to think about it is if you make a mistake, it doesn't mean you're a bad person, but you can be accountable for the mistake and then correct the behavior so that you don't cause harm. So this happened in a like a microcosm with my son having a communication faux pas with an adult and his best friend. And so we had a conversation about that. And I really I think this is so important. And I'm speaking like as a parent, but I'm also speaking as a parent to other parents who are raising children who don't look like me, right? To understand that yes, we make mistakes. Making a mistake doesn't make you a bad person, and you still must be accountable for the behavior and
Yeah,
change the behavior, right? And so it's how it like on a very personal level shows up, right? And then of course you talked about our dynamic, like we make communication faux pas all the time, and just because, I or you communicate in a particular way, it doesn't mean, oh, like we're bad people. Oh, we're going to break up, oh, like that kind of thing. It just means, all right, this didn't work. Now and one of the things that we model very well is keeping the dialogue open. Okay,
yeah,
what didn't work about it? What could have worked better about it? How do we now make it work the next time? Here's what you could do, Jill. Maisha, here's what you could do to
yeah,
help me. And I often share with people what one of my favorite phrases, and I think you know this because you've heard me say it a lot, is the way my brain works is
yeah.
right.
Absolutely. It's kind of like a constant, like in math, and I don't remember exactly how to define a constant, but it's like a thing that's true no matter what.
Yes.
Like, these characteristics, until we figure out a way to dismantle this system of oppression, these characteristics they're just there.
Mhm.
They're in the air that we breathe, they're in the water that we drink.
Mhm.
We are swimming in it. So it's a given that it's going to happen. It's
Mhm.
not an if, but it's a when. And then it's
Yeah.
like, how do we then notice it I thought, oh my God, oh, okay, that's what's happening here.
Mhm.
Mine, I think, like a good chunk of sense of urgency. I feel like that's like a high. If you had like a pie chart of all of the different ones that I might display, I think sense of urgency probably takes up a good solid chunk of that.
Mhm.
Um, and okay, because it's part of our culture.
Mhm.
So how do we so sense of urgency is this need for something to happen like now or yesterday
Mhm.
or a minute ago or 5 minutes ago,
Mhm.
and rushing through things, or rushing other people through things for outcome rather than process, like
Mhm.
focusing more on getting a thing finished than having it be done in an equitable way.
Mhm.
And so for me, like we're submitting a proposal for a thing.
Mhm.
And Maisha started the proposal and was like, "Hey, can you share some things? Add some things."
Mhm.
And I had a few questions. And so what I could have done was like, "Hey, I've got a few questions about this. Can you clarify this?" And I did do that. And then I went on for like 3 minutes about like all the things that were confusing me and things that, but what I could have done is just been like, "I have some questions. Can you clarify?" Period.
Mhm.
Hit send. Wait for her response and then go from there. But the sense of urgency, and this is like, so it's minutia, but it
Mhm.
causes harm if we don't recognize it. And so I kind of I mean, you could share how it landed for
Mhm.
you. But what we don't need to get all of it done immediately in
Mhm.
order to get it done correct. We actually shouldn't get it all done immediately in order to get it done correctly. So what are
Mhm.
your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's interesting as you talked about sense of urgency. What I noticed in my own, as I listened to the communication, and then my own sort of automatic response was the need to pull back,
Mm,
like from the urgency of responding. And I didn't notice that until just now because now we talk about the characteristics, mine, and how we often see it manifest in, um, well, I don't want to make a generalization. I'll say mine is right to comfort. So it's
yeah.
the internalized version of right to comfort, like my need to make things comfortable for other people all of the time. And that on the other side is another person's feeling of the right to feel comfortable all the time, like how that looks on the flip side. But on my side, it's I don't want other people to be uncomfortable. So what it does, and what it often does in people of marginalized identities, is it makes us shut up.
Mm,
It makes us not talk. It makes us try to make everything sound super nicey nicey so that people don't get mad at us.
yeah.
And so, as I know that about myself, and I know, okay, this is a if you talk about the pie chart, like the big one for me is right to comfort. Because I want to make everybody comfortable and happy and, people
Your
pleasing.
your chunk is right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's my chunk. Um, and so it causes like being in conflict or being in disagreement to be very difficult for me to communicate in because I'm navigating saying it in a way that doesn't hurt people's feelings. And then also it just like brings up a whole set of physical feelings in my body to have to communicate something that's not like to have to stand for myself or to have to communicate that something is going to land as not nice. And so yeah, that's so just like kind of giving the other side of what it feels like, a different characteristic feels like in a similar circumstance. And the interesting thing is, you never know what a person's internalized thing is going to show up, like based on our birth luck, our background, our lived experience. People will have different, larger expressions of one or another, and what there is as we said earlier, is to notice it.
Yeah.
Because if we don't notice it, then we can't interrupt it. And I love too, you've sort of mentioned this, like noticing it and noticing that it's a characteristic, kind of rather than like a personal flaw. 'Cause I think a lot of people take it as a personal flaw, like, this is a
Yeah,
personal flaw, there's something about that. It helps to take the shame out of it and view it as a behavior, separating behavior from,
yeah.
like, a person's character.
I think it's funny how you mentioned at the beginning how it all comes back to fear.
Mhm.
Fear underlies right to comfort.
Mhm.
And if you had been afraid to speak up, if you might have actually been afraid, but if that had been strong enough that it stopped you, and or if I was not a safe space for you and I were to get defensive
Mhm.
when you brought stuff up to me or deny things, which is another characteristic,
Mhm.
then that keeps that power dynamic in place.
That's right.
The person is not able is too afraid to speak up, or they're afraid of causing discomfort, or a person is I must be comfortable at all times. I cannot be challenged.
Mhm.
I can't have anything wrong with me. Like those are keeping the thing. And now you and I are equals in this business.
Mhm.
We happen to be a black woman and a white woman. I can also have sense of urgency with another white person,
Mhm.
and you can have right to comfort
That's right.
for you with another black person. So
Mhm.
we do happen to have that racial difference, but
Mhm.
it's not like it's only there because we are of different racial identities.
That's right.
Um, so can you talk a little bit about internalized? Because like there's like complexities to all of this
Yes.
that we've like sort of alluded to.
Mhm.
But can you talk about that?
Yeah, yeah, I think it's important to understand that, it's like you said earlier, um, this ism is sort of baked into the water we drink and the air we breathe. Like, it's just there. And so when you're born into a culture of white supremacism with all these various symptoms and characteristics, it's like when you're born into a family and the family has a certain set of rules, right? These are the things that you do. These are the things that you don't do. These are the things that you say. Come home by the time the street lights are on. What goes on in our house stays in our house. I'm talking about like certain rules. You have a certain rules. You're born into those rules. You automatically assume those rules. It is the same with this ism, right? We're born into a culture with a certain set of dynamics and rules that were baked in some 500 years ago, right? Or longer. And and so now we even though you know, we as in I'm speaking we as in people who share my identity as a woman and maybe as a person of color, Black woman, right? Um, any person of any marginalized identity born into this then breathes the air, assumes these certain rules without knowing it. Because there's the spoken rule and then there's the unspoken rule.
Yeah.
There's the observation of society from which we learn. So then, yes, we are going to internalize some of these characteristics unknowingly, unconsciously. And the key is to be willing, because it's easy to then want to deny it. Well, good, guess what? That's a characteristic. It's easy to want to get defensive. What? Guess what? That's a characteristic. Because guess what? That's what we learned how to do.
Right.
But when we start to like slow down and allow ourselves to say, "Oh, you know what? These are characteristics. How does this apply in my life? How am I manifesting this and how is it harming myself or others?" Because in our community there's a lot of transphobia, homophobia that can be stated, right? And misogyny. It shows up in every community because it is an ism. And so we need to be able to be willing to recognize that just because one occupies a marginalized identity um, doesn't exempt them
Mm.
from displaying those characteristics. You can both experience them and be a perpetrator at the same time. And it's
Yeah.
important to understand that as women, as people of color, as I don't occupy another, like I don't occupy a trans or another gender identity other than the one that I occupy, which is that of woman, female. And so I can't speak from that space, but I'm just, what I'm saying is that no matter what identity, marginalized identity you occupy, there's anti-blackness in the trans community, right? There is surprisingly, there's like misogynist, paternalistic kind of stuff that goes on in the trans community as well.
Mm.
It's, you know, and so it's hard to say because it's like, well, you wouldn't think it, and it is what it is.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I see that in my community as a Jewish woman, like that's complicated enough.
Mm.
Having this like identity that I can usually hide, that I like, I'm trying not to hide, and then like bring in Israel. And then it's all of a sudden like all of the things, because with the Jewish identity, we have an identity of being oppressed and marginalized.
Mhm.
And we also in some ways, I think in Western society, we do have some power, but also like specifically in Israel, we are the Israelis, Jewish Israelis are the oppressor.
Mhm.
And and so much shows up. Like I see right to comfort showing up all the time in my community.
Mhm.
These earrings that I'm wearing are watermelon earrings, are a symbol of Palestinian solidarity. And I've been told that I'm not allowed to wear them in certain people's presence because it makes them uncomfortable.
Mhm.
It makes them feel activated, and it makes them feel like they're being harmed by a
Mhm.
pair of earrings that are a piece of fruit. And so it's like there's this right to comfort, this
Mhm.
and there's kind of only one right way is another one.
Mhm.
It's like
Mhm.
you cannot be Jewish and not support Israel.
Mm.
You cannot support Palestine and still be Jewish.
Mm.
Which is so these binaries, that's only one right way. And the binary, like those are things that keep us separated.
Mhm.
And instead of focusing on our collective belonging to just kind of owning our kind of unique place in this world. Like
Mhm.
we're blamed for all the problems
Mhm.
and we have a lot of privilege, and we
Mhm.
have white Jews have a lot of proximity to whiteness.
Mhm.
But like when we don't own that, then we end up being the oppressors. So it's like it's such a weird place to be. And then we don't own our anti-blackness in our community. We don't own our own misogyny that we may have. And we can, because when we don't own that it happens to everybody, then we keep pointing our fingers at other groups and we say,
Mhm.
you have to never offend me. You can't ever cause harm to my group. But then we don't look inside our own groups to see how we might be perpetrating harm towards others.
Oh, yeah. So flip side, right? Similarly, especially now inside of this election, there is you can, if you support Kamala Harris, then take down your Palestinian flag, right? So this like we're seeing this conversation inside the Black Arab community, and even within the Black community, and there's some complexity to that because yes, I mean, there are a lot of people who would, if there could be third party, would probably vote that way. And also, what people don't understand is that this is not a single party, this is not a single issue election. And so, two things can be true. You can support Palestine and a desire a permanent ceasefire and deoccupation, and um, and support Kamala Harris, even though you don't support that particular view, because in the United States of America, the alternative is dangerous to Black people, people of color, trans people, like all
Yeah.
of these things. And so it becomes a complexity that then we must hold, and we're holding it, and no one else is willing to hold that. complexity. And so then anti-Blackness shows up in that.
Well, right. Yeah, exactly. Like if you don't support Kamala because of your feelings about Palestine, then you are anti-Black or, labeled as that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really freaking hard. And I want to push back a little bit on the like calling it a one issue election because, I see Palestine as like all issues, like I see it as all oppression. And I know you and I agree about this, but I just, for anyone listening who kind of sees it, like it can be seen as like, oh, it's just a vote about Israel and Palestine. And it's also a vote about caring for and dismantling, people of all marginalized identities and dismantling those systems. So it is that. And it's also, what does life look like for people? Like I have the privilege of my life. If Trump gets elected, my life probably won't change that much. I'll be really angry and I'll be fighting against the things and I'll be doing that. But like, so I have a privilege of being like, maybe I would vote third party because that end result, even though I don't want it, wouldn't harm me as much. And then so it's on me to think about like, what are the complexities of this?
Mm-hmm.
How is this going to impact everybody? Even if we don't agree with everything, how is this going to impact other people I care about and other people whose voices I like want to uplift and who deserve all the freedoms that I have. So it's like, so complicated, right? Like there's so much.
There is. It is. And that's the piece that's so difficult when it comes to white supremacism, is that there's complexity within complexity driven by fear. And at the helm of it is all white supremacism, right? Like all of these various complexities of we have to decide between two parties, neither of which are the best party. And the third party is not developed enough to actually potentially win. And so we have to think, and so it's like we have to think within two party, but where does that come from? White supremacism.
Yeah.
Right? That's the problem.
Yeah.
Right? So dismantling that is really at the bottom line. Dismantling it and then recognizing that this is a Titanic that doesn't turn around very quickly. Right? So, there's the big picture, and we've gone from global to nation, and then we bring it back down to, well, what is ours to do?
Yeah.
Each and every person as we interact with one another. What is ours to do? Because the nation, the world, the corporations, the healthcare systems, the systems, they're all made up of people. And if we're going to dismantle it, we're going to dismantle a system, people have to dismantle the system. The system's not going to dismantle itself. And so it does take people doing the work and people leaning into uncomfortable conversations like this. And, admittedly, this is a very uncomfortable conversation for me to have. I am clear that I do not like talking politics in public. Because like the amount of landmines that that exist, and because my belief system is, I feel like in general, I may or may not have shared this with you. My belief system overall is, I think, different from most people, and I can only express it in words so much as I can express it in words, but I see things very, very differently, and then I have to operate in a world of binary. Right? But that's not how I operate. I don't operate like how I normally operate is not in the world of binary. It's in the world of complexity and holding all of that. And so, but we have to be able to lean into these difficult conversations, everyone, in order to be able to, and from the standpoint of listening and keeping the dialogue open rather than from a very positional, I'm right, you're wrong.
Yeah.
Because that shuts the conversation down and nothing gets dismantled. Yeah.
I think when we can, it's funny because I think we talk about the binary and we also talk about like complexities, but we don't always talk about dialectics. And that's the like more than one thing can be true. I feel like we don't as explicitly talk about that with white supremacism culture as much, I think. And maybe I'm wrong about that, but like that that to me is emerging as like top contender for like the most important one to dismantle, because like if we don't allow there to be space for more than one thing, we are never going to be able to find any solutions to any of the problems we have. I mean, you think about environmental justice and the environmental justice that's happening in Gaza right now. Guess what? Gaza right next door to Israel. It's going to impact Israel too. And so these things that reproductive justice, not having access to healthcare in Gaza, like all of these things impact the people in power too. They don't just impact the people who are marginalized or who aren't, in the top of the power structure. And so if we aren't able to dismantle those, we end up fighting for things that are harming us too.
Right.
And none of that makes any sense, but we can't see it until we allow ourselves to have some complexity inside of our brains.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. I mean, and just to, for those who are, we use the word binary and dialectics, but it's really either this, then that, or that. It's us versus them. It's right versus wrong. It's invalid versus invalid. It's good versus bad. It's the versus.
Yeah.
Right. That's the binary. And that's all that we see in the social medias, in the medias.
Right. And it doesn't mean like, let's take both sides. Both sides are right. It's not like the people marching are all good people too. It's not that kind of a thing. It's honoring lived experiences, more than one lived experience, and not having, even if they seem to be opposite, it's okay for two things to seem to be opposite, but both still be true.
Yeah. And it's the allowing for the both and lets empathy and compassion seep through. Yeah. And you can still hold your position and still have empathy and compassion for others. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, whoo.
Yeah.
We have the ability to go deep. And I think this is a good space to kind of pause until our next journey together, our next episode together. I think that, one thing I think that people could potentially take away, and I would love for you to kind of share your thing as well, is I think that sitting in the space of this, examining where you're in the binary, I think that is, if you were to take away anything, examine where you're in the binary and you're not holding complexities for other people's lived experience.
Yeah. And that can be anywhere. It can be family dynamics. It can be nothing to do with politics. So look for it in the places that you may not expect it. And that's maybe where it will kind of, that's where,
That's right.
kind of comes to life there.
Yeah.
I'd also love to hear if anyone's, watching all the way here or listening all the way to the end. I'd love to know if anyone has anything else that they would love for us to discuss in the future. We have some, I think, lovely ideas. And it would also be interesting to hear from people if they have found this helpful, and if there's other things that they're like, I don't quite understand this. Can you talk about that? Would be something to put in the comments or to reach out to one of us.
Absolutely. Well, so with that, I'll thank the listeners for listening, because without the listeners, there is no podcast. And share it with a friend, share it with a family member, share it with a colleague, share it with even people you don't like, because it's good information, and it's part of us creating the ripple for transformation. To be able to, when we create these ripples become waves, become tidal waves, become tsunamis for transforming and dismantling the things that need to be dismantled, so that we can really live in some type of equanimity.
Yeah.
Together. right? Harmony is the word. Yeah. Awesome. Well, you know where to find us, consciousanti-racism.com. If you are interested in having us come and speak for your organization, or if you're interested in one in our trainings, live or asynchronous, we do have a CME version as well. Jill, if they want to reach out to you in terms of like tapping, you do, tapping, speaking trainings. You also do meditation retreats. How do they reach you?
My website, jillwener.com. It's JILLWENER.com. And all my stuff is on there. And for people who are listening to this on my platform, how do they get in touch with you for all of your psychological safety and communication work?
Absolutely. If communication is an issue in your organization and you need some work, I do live trainings, as well as I do have a course called Communication That Transforms. It is also CME accredited, as well as your tapping training, right?
Yes.
That's right. So you can reach me on LinkedIn. I'm always on LinkedIn, or you can go to mindremappingacademy.com. That's mindremappingacademy.com. That is where I will be. All right, y'all. Well, thank you for joining us today, and we will see you on the next episode. Until then, though, stay empowered.